and really wants to like understand the world. So my
Oh yeah.
activities with her is like we'll usually like go through the news, and she'll find like one thing, we'll pick out a story, and then we'll just like talk about it. And it's really interesting because like it hadn't occurred to me before how much, in order to understand like technology, you need to really understand like government and civics and politics and law and like all of these different things. So trying to explain to like a child who hasn't thought much about these things, um, is it's both very fascinating for me, um, but it's just been like a cool bonding experience of like and you start off and it's like a really basic understanding, but then after you've done it for like a year or two, that like okay, she has like a very good understanding of like the tech industry and the world and all the stuff, and it's pretty interesting to talk through.
Well, I think it's inspiring just to even parents to hear like what can you talk to your kid about? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like if your kid's 13 and you're still reading them Bears, St. Bears, whatever, some of that's on you. Like you got to evolve some of the curriculum for your child, you know? Because yeah, a lot of parents think you probably can't kind of build these worlds in a child's head, but if you start with the basic blocks, then you kind of can, you know, and help them get bigger ideas about things. I think that's cool. I think there's nothing more important than how a parent communicates with their child, you know, and what they communicate to them. Because so often we just expect like teachers and different
yeah,
curriculum out in the world or just the
yeah.
world to do that for our children. But man, I think the biggest faucet for a child is the parent, you know. That's pretty cool. And the little one is just a little.
What's going on, everybody? It's Professor Zeus, and I'm back with another video. This is your first time on the channel. Just know I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. It's like so many of you guys are watching these videos, but you guys aren't subscribing. Please go ahead and subscribe. It'll mean a lot to the channel. So, I came across this video, and it just made me think, sometimes you might feel overwhelmed, trying to teach your kids about the world, when there's all these different things going on, from different breakthroughs in technology, global politics. It's a lot to unpack for children these days. But it made me start to think, what if we can turn, all these different types of complex topics into bonding moments that essentially spark curiosity and wisdom in our kids. So today, that's what we're looking at. We're diving into a powerful blueprint for teaching our kids about the world, inspired by Mark Zuckerberg's recent interview with Theo Vaughn. So it's not really just about raising smart kids. It's raising children who are insightful, thoughtful, and engaged. So let me try to break this down. So, I was just, flipping through YouTube and stuff like that. And, I found this video with Mark Zuckerberg. And, he shared a gem about how he connects with his daughter. She's really into history, math, and wants to really understand the world. So, they pick a news story each week, talk it through. And, that sounds simple. But why I found it so, profound and interesting is because, kids today are essentially growing up in the world of AI, so many different global challenges and endless information. And if we don't guide them, they'll, either get lost in the noise or let someone else, specifically social media, shape their worldview. And, Mark Zuckerberg, he's the founder of Meta, Facebook. And, he realized that in order to explain tech, he has to teach his daughter about government, civics, and law. And, these aren't just school subjects. They're essentially the building blocks of how the world works. And, having these conversations early, you're not just teaching your children about facts, you're teaching them critical thinking, empathy, as well as curiosity. And, the best part about it, it's a bonding experience that shows your kids you trust them to handle big ideas. And, it's interesting because, I have a 3-year-old son, and he's so interested in the world. But I'm personally thinking about, how I can, try to break down these complex ideas to him, because, as at 3 years old, he's extremely smart and he's extremely vocal with a lot of things. People will always come up to me and like, oh my God, your son is like, his vocabulary is crazy and he's so talkative. He knows how to express himself so well. And I really appreciate that. So I'm just, personally figuring out ways that I can, guide my son's way of thinking into being, just light years ahead of how I was thinking when I was his age, So I look at, Mark Zuckerberg's, his whole approach is like it's building with blocks, right? You start small and you stack up over time. Let's say your kid is 10, my kid is 3, right? But let's say your kid is 10 years old and they're curious about why people are talking about climate change. You shouldn't start speaking about, carbon emissions, whatever, different things like that. You should instead start with, hey, the earth is getting warmer because of how we use energy. What do you think we could do about it? And so many different people have different opinions, different discussions about climate change and different things like that. But if they are interested, if they do, want to learn more about that, you can just, spark different things within them to start questioning them, to make them start questioning different things, because it invites them to think, without feeling judged, right? So, another step-by-step way is, you could just pick a topic weekly, like Mark Zuckerberg was saying in the video, it could be a news story, a historical event, or even a tech trend. Let your child have a say in choosing, what the news story is about, because this builds ownership within them. And then, try breaking it down. If, you're talking about elections, start with, people vote to choose leaders, who make rules. Then, over some time, you can add different layers like why voting matters or how laws are made. Then you can start asking them questions, right? Instead of lecturing them, instead of talking to them about certain things, you can ask them, what do you think this means? Or how could you solve this? And doing this allows your kid to essentially, build confidence and start critically thinking, right? And over a year, over some time, these small conversations can give your child a surprisingly deep understanding of the world, just like, Mark Zuckerberg's daughter. And just like he said, she's now able to, grasp and better understand the tech industry as well as global issues, right? And I want to also add what Theo Vaughn was saying, when he said, if your 13-year-old is stuck on the same, bedtime, I think he was talking about the Bearstein Bears or whatever, that's a little, that if your kid is still stuck on that, that's on you. Kids grow, and so should the way we talk to them. If your child is obviously ready for more, you shouldn't hold back because you think they're too young. Our kids are like sponges, and they can handle big ideas if you frame them in the right way. I won't forget, like, so it's so funny. My son is so funny. Like, sometimes I have to put him on timeout, but he understands, like, oh, I did something that daddy said I shouldn't do. So this is the consequence. Like, I don't really want to go to timeout, but I know that I didn't do something that I was supposed to do. So he'll go sit down or whatever. And then I'll be talking to him and I'll be like, listen, listen, listen. So sometimes I'll do something that he'll be like, no, daddy, you're not supposed to do that. He's like, okay, go timeout. And then he'll try to tell me, he'd be like, no, daddy, listen, listen, listen. So he did that the other day, and I thought that was so crazy. So, kids are able to understand, complex things when you're able to break it down and chunk by chunk. And, if your kid is into gaming, you can talk about how the gaming industry works, right? Explain the technology behind it, the economics, or even the 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 ethics of, microtransactions, right? Connected to their world, and suddenly, they're learning about business and morality without even realizing it. And, to Mark Zuckerberg's point is, parents are the biggest faucet for a child's growth, right? Up until they're teenagers, you are their main instructors, and then after teenagers, it becomes their friend group. But, schools and teachers do play a role, but no one is going to shape a kid's worldview other than the parents. So you have to evolve the curriculum, right? Swap out, you know, story time for discussions about AI, history, or why, people disagree on social media. Obviously, these topics will change depending on the age of your child. So, because it's not really about overloading them with information, it's about trusting their potential. And the magic to this approach is it's not necessarily just about teaching, it's about connecting. When you talk about the world with your kid, you're saying, I see you and I value your thoughts. And that's huge for, their confidence as well as your relationship with your child, right? Just, try to make it fun, low pressure, and, discuss maybe news stories over dinner or while you're playing outside or different things like that. Share your own questions like, I'm not sure why this law was passed, but what do you think about it? It shows that, you guys are learning together. And obviously, us as parents, we're not going to have all the answers. But if your kid asks about something that's tricky, like cryptocurrency or global conflicts, say, "Hey, we can figure this out together." So you can pull up different, articles or videos, and you guys can learn together. It's less about being an expert and more about being curious together. Teaching your kids about the world isn't just about facts. It's about, preparing them to navigate life with clarity and courage. In a world full of noise and information, your voice as a parent is their anchor. By starting small, evolving the conversation and making it a bonding moment, you're not just raising your kids, you're raising thinkers, problem solvers, and, compassionate humans. And, Mark Zuckerberg's story, reminds us that the biggest faucet, again, for a child's growth is you, the parent. So take that first step, pick a topic this week, ask your kid, what they're curious about. You don't need to be perfect, just be present, right? The world is obviously a complex place, but together, you and your kids can make sense of it. But that's it for today, man. And that was kind of like a blueprint I just thought about teaching your kids about the world. If you found this valuable, hit that like button, subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. And share it with your friends or family or parents that you might know who might need this. Drop a comment. What's one topic you're excited to talk about with your kid? Let's try to inspire each other. Until next time, it's you and I verse. Information, application, execution. Till next time.